of that page right there. Thank you all, first of all, for being here tonight and for allowing a little bit of time there at the front end for introductions. It's always nice to know who's in the room and to have a bit of an understanding about people's level of experience in writing grants. And it sounds like we have some folks who have and some who haven't. And you know, things changed during COVID and we've stepped away from it and are now coming back. So I think it's always helpful, even if you've done these before, to pop in for a little refresher. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all tonight. I personally have not done one of these grants, but I have reviewed everything carefully. And I guess one of the things I would like to share is that the bulk of the content that this grant requests or this application requests are very common among other grant applications. So as you prepare this application going forward, you may find that you are preparing some things that you could use in other grant applications in the future. So it's within the realm of what would be sort of standard grant content. And I think that's always nice when you can perhaps multi-purpose things that you spent some time developing. So I'm just going to walk through some of the basics and a bit of process, and then we'll go through the actual application form itself and kind of hit on some highlights that where I hope I can offer a little bit of advice through my past experience and questions that I've received in the past from folks who are new to grant writing in particular. So I think it kind of goes without saying, but I will say, always being paying attention to your deadline. It's so easy for those things to slip away. And this is great. We're 1 month out. That's not too early to start your application now. I know it can be easy to procrastinate when there's a deadline that's a month away and think, I'll work on that in a few weeks, because of course you've got a million other priorities, as we all do. But I would recommend building in some time so that you give yourself ample time to really put forth your best effort. This is a competitive grant process, so it's going to be evaluated against others who are applying. And I don't know how many applications are received each year, but I imagine it's a fair amount. Even tonight, I'm learning about lots of arts and culture organizations I wasn't familiar with. And so I think there's a very rich landscape of folks who may be applying. So you want to put your best foot forward. Applying a few days early never hurts either. Plus, first of all, it's off your plate. You don't have to sweat it, but it just is another way to sort of bolster your position as someone who's well prepared and ready to go. I can't emphasize enough that, as they say here, before starting your grant application, please read the cultural plan. And I did look at that, reviewed it a bit. It's very helpful because it states very, very clearly what the plan is for Clackamas County and the things that this particular grant application is interested in funding. So once you've reviewed that, and if you don't see your project aligning with that, know that this might not be the right opportunity for you. And trying to fit a square peg into a round hole doesn't generally deliver success. Sounds like most of you, or many of you, know this process, and in just listening somewhat to the projects that you were sharing, that there's likely to be good alignment, but you really do want to check against that, because not every application is a fit for every organization. It's a nicely put together plan, and I think it gives you a good sense of that really big picture strategic direction that it is hoping to guide Clackamas County arts and culture in. I'm just going to glance at this again, as it mentions being a competitive application. So that's definitely worth your time to look at that. It makes it, I'll drop in some technical things too, or pull them out as we go along. This encourages you to complete your response in a Word or other document that allow you to do all of your writing, check your word counts and so forth and so on, so that you can just cut and paste into the application form when everything's ready to go. It's very difficult to compose as you go in these formats. So making sure that you take care of that in a document that you can preserve, make changes to, have others review, is most easily done in Word or any other similar document format that you might use. And there is contact information there. So particularly in starting early, that's when you'll know if you're running into trouble. So I would, this is the time to determine if you're going to have any questions and reach out to the folks over there. Yeah, go ahead and scroll on down. I have not used this platform before. Hopefully many of you have. So Obviously, this starts out with the very basics, your organization name. I'll express that beautifully tonight. There are two ways that you can apply, and I did check with Diane on this because this is new to me. Obviously, as an organization, which it seems everyone here tonight is representing an organization. However, individuals who are partnering with an organization to be part of a project that's going to be delivered can also apply. Individuals on their own, this particular application is not isn't for that. But if you are an individual who plans to work with an organization, then you can spearhead this application as well. For those of you who have maybe volunteers, or you have various people handling different roles and responsibilities within your organization, be sure that you're clear on who your contact person is going to be, because the communication about this application, once you've submitted and if you are advanced or not, is going to come to that person and your title. And even if you're a volunteer, that's great. And note that if you are not the president or executive director, or that top leadership position, do be sure to make sure that that name is there. Important to note that mailing address versus physical address, because documents may need to be mailed to you. And sometimes, like the Arts Alliance itself, doesn't maintain physical offices, so mail goes to a PO box. That if that's your case, you want to be sure that you note that. If you actually have a physical address, then it's great to include that too, so folks kind of know where you are. Contact number, make sure it's one that people can access you easily at. I know many of us work remotely, and so may not even have access to an office phone. So if you're comfortable sharing your personal cell phone, as I often do, just make sure it's someplace that people can reach you, because they may have a question about your application and want to clarify something, and you want to make sure that you're responsive. If you receive a message, for example, that you're responsive to those things. I think that the rest of it's pretty self-evident, but again, contacting a contact email that is going to be monitored regularly. And some organizations will have an info at address, and that's great as long as you're checking it daily. But if it's something that only gets seen occasionally or kind of gets routed through various paths, you want to provide the most direct access that you can to the reviewer so that they can reach you in case of a question. This applies to any individual who's applying in collaboration with an organization. All of that information is similarly required here or requested here. Yeah, so I think we can scroll past all that. So for those who are applying, are individuals co-applying with an organization, it's really important that you're describing your role and why you're working with this particular organization, because that's going to help reviewers understand why you in particular are a part of this project and why the organization itself isn't necessarily taking the lead on the application. If you're the one who's going to be organizing the project, delivering the project, whatever that might be, you're bringing expertise to the table that the organization has asked you to bring in. It's great for them to know why you in particular are in this role. Hopefully everybody knows the year they're founded, although from time to time I find out that organizations don't know that. I imagine many of you are 501c3s, but if you fall into those other categories, of course you want to note that accordingly. And if you're something else, which sounds like has been the case in some instances, you just want to make sure that you're describing what you are within the criteria of who are organizations that are accepted. Your organization mission, you've got 25 words here, which is not a lot. So hopefully your mission is concise, but that's pretty clear cut. It's the only thing you really need to include there. So whatever that mission statement may be, that's your place to do it. If you need to trim it down a bit, look for those sort of extraneous words that you might have to cut just to get it within the 25 word limit. Because when they're doing an online application like this, those word limits are hard and fast. There's no fudging it. You can't do 26. So you'll just have to be mindful of your editing along the way. I like this question here or the request here to describe 2 or 3 highlights or accomplishments in your organization's history. Again, not a lot of word limits, so this might be 1 or 2 bullet points, but it gives an example of what you've done that is going to help a reviewer see, oh, they have the capacity to do this as well. So, and I think things that are more current are always great. But if there's something that really has set you apart or is something you're known for that you think a reviewer should know about what you've accomplished, or highlighting something that has been successful for you, that's a place to do it. Again, not a lot of words, so you need to be concise, think it through. You may have 3 or 4 or 5 options, at your disposal. Really narrow it down to, based on the criteria of this grant and the things that they hope to achieve, do we have a couple of examples that most closely align with that? There's a range here to request, and that is between $751 and $2,500. I understand there's another program for applications that are more specifically under that amount for special needs. But
right.
many
So
of
Lisa, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. So for folks who don't know, the Cultural Coalition also has, and the application is on their website, something called a micro grant. And those are usually about $500. And if that criteria, I encourage you to check that out. And if that criteria fits, you can apply for micro grants throughout the year. There's not an application window like with this grant. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate that clarification. $2,500 can go a long way, but it isn't always the amount that you need to do the full project, or it might not even be as much as you need. So when you do your project budget, you're going to look at that, and it's going to determine how much you ask for. And if you had experience with this in the past, you may have asked for 25 and gotten 1,000 or 1,500. Know that you might not be funded at the full amount, but ask for the amount that is appropriate to your project budget. The title of your project is pretty self-explanatory, but again, with only 10 words, you want to make sure every word counts and that it clearly expresses what you plan to do in a way that a reviewer would understand. And then the summary. I think this is probably one of the most important parts to focus on. There's a limit of 100 words. I'm going to harp on this a bit. I apologize, but it's so easy to get carried away with all you want to say and then realize you don't have a lot of space to say it. 100 words is about 2 average paragraphs. It's not a ton, but it's enough. So your project description, your summary really should elevate the highest aspects of your project in a way that lets the reviewer know, okay, first of all, it is in alignment with what we hope to fund, and it's something that I want to learn more about. I caution organizations sometimes too that understand that you're speaking to an audience that doesn't know you, or may, but probably doesn't. I don't know who are you, what folks are used as reviewers. You always assume they don't know anything, even though they may, and that you use that summary as it's your marketing statement really for your project, to let folks know that this is worthwhile and that that the funding will make a difference and that you'll be delivering something to the community that will be of value. So again, that's not a lot of words, but take the time to do that. If you need to write something bigger and then pare it down, that's sometimes helpful too. I know these are very nuts and bolts suggestions, but as I go through projects, I'm always testing myself on all of these things. So I hope it's helpful. The start date is a calendar year, and an end date is a calendar year framework. Some of you may operate on a fiscal year that starts July 1 and ends June 30. So just keep that in mind, and knowing that whatever project you're proposing has to fit within that time frame, whether it's in your current fiscal year in the future or the next fiscal year. And then this really gets you started in selecting the one funding priority that most relates to your request. And that's where, again, going back to that plan and looking at it will allow you to make the right choice here. And when they refer to page 10 and 11, I would encourage you to look at those as well. I took a look at that, and it's pretty clear what they're looking for. They provide really roadmaps on some outcomes that they would like to see, or the impacts that they'd like to see. And so that would guide you in deciding where you fit. I suspect that many of you will fit into the number 2, where it's supportive, the creation of or participation in cultural projects and activities. That's pretty wide ranging when it comes to just making a project happen or reaching a particular population. And some of the others are a little bit more specific. And you might feel that you fit into more than one, and you may well, but you're going to really want to come up with what's the one that best expresses that. And then you're going to be able to kind of talk about that in how your project is going to advance those indicators of success that are mentioned on page 10 and 11. So really look at those, consider them. You don't have to fill every one of them, but look for the ones that do align, and then, really make it clear that the project you're doing is going to deliver an indicator of success that they have defined for this particular grant opportunity. And I think that's, again, very important for them to know that you're on track and understand what they're looking for, and that you understand that you're a fit for this funding opportunity. Yeah, I think we can pop down to the narrative section unless Diane have any questions popped up. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Hopefully
No,
not
there's
too
nothing
fast.
in the Q&A yet,
Okay,
so
well,
it's looking good.
it's pretty basic stuff, but hopefully helpful. So this section now is really your chance to shine. And again, you've got some word limits that you want to keep in mind. I'm gonna go through a couple of suggestions for sort of preparing for this, particularly this element. It is helpful to really take the time to think this through before you dive in. I know sometimes the inclination is to just move on it and figure it out as you go, which is certainly an approach that you can take. But I think that, and I do this with the organizations I work with all the time, we really walk through these questions together and talk about what we feel is content that's going to answer the questions most effectively. So as I mentioned at the front, definitely reading through all of their criteria, all the requirements, all of the indicators of success, so that you understand if and how your project aligns with this grant opportunity. If there are others in your organization, on your team, that you can talk this through, I would recommend doing that. It's amazing how many ideas surface when you're talking together versus it's coming out of one person's head. As someone who does a lot of grant writing, I always appreciate the perspective of others in this, and it also ensures that you're on the same page about what you're applying for. I often find that it's helpful with each of these questions to maybe toss some bullet points in there as a starting point, and then revisit those and say, now, does this help me tell the story I want to tell, or is there something missing? It's an easy way to sort of create that check and balance for yourself before you get too deep into writing a lot of content that you might later have to redo or scrap because something new has surfaced. So giving yourself that chance to really think it through is so important, and is just great efficiency. It seems like a no-brainer, but I remind folks all the time, please be sure you're actually reading the question and that the answer you're providing is an answer to the question they asked. So often we just want to tell our story, and that's obviously our role here in putting a grant application together, but we need to do it within the context of the questions that are asked. These are pretty fundamental, so I don't think there's anything there that would trip you up. But that's where, again, it's good to go through, review it in advance, think about those bullet points, decide what pieces you can plug in where that do allow you to tell your complete story. And we've talked about making sure that you line up well with their instructions and criteria. If you have an opportunity, once you've got something drafted, I always recommend that you have someone connected to your organization who may not know about this project or hasn't been a part of the writing process to give it a look and ask them if in fact what you've put together answers the question and is clearly articulating what you plan to do. As many grants as I've written, I still appreciate that kind of feedback, and I have my stuff reviewed all the time. And then just a couple of things that, and this will tie in a little bit later, but generally, I think, again, you all have done similar things like this or learning, is just always be realistic. We get so excited, I know I do, about the projects that I want to express, and we have big ideas and big plans, but we may want to overstate that as a way to impress a funder, and that is just not something that's of use. So be realistic and in many ways keep it simple. That's why word limits are provided. You don't need to provide a whole lot of extra fluff and sparkle to an application. It's really using your words succinctly and for high impact, and that anything that you do place in there is representing what you're planning to do realistically. Because ultimately the goal is you're going to get funded, and then you're going to have to deliver what you propose. And so, don't set yourself up for something that might ultimately come around and not serve you very well. So I'm going to kind of talk through, I made a few notes. Let me catch myself up here on that piece of paper. Yeah, I've gone through that. Yeah, right out of the gate, when you are describing the need, problem, or gap that your project is going to fill, do that within the context of their funding priorities and criteria. You may have identified a gap that you understand to be true within your community or within the folks that you connect with, but it really should be in relationship to what they're defining, so that there's a clear path to understanding why you're applying. And that gap could be that, particular opportunities aren't available to people, or that this is a new project and it's something you want to introduce to the community. You may be reaching an audience that's not typically been engaged, and you have strategies for engaging them. So whatever that may be, is looking at your community and understanding the gap that you hope to fill, or the need that you hope to fulfill in relationship to their criteria. And then it's, then how you're going to do that. I think the probably the two biggest questions I ask myself in everything I write is, why are we going to do that? Which the first question sort of brings forth. Why are we going to do this? Because there's your need or a gap. And then it's the how. And this is your space. You've got a little more room here to tell how your project will meet that. So you've got those two things need to be sure to line up. So you've identified that gap. You've identified the project you want to deliver that's going to fill that gap and bring something of value to your community and to those who work within your organization, or whatever that may look like. So that gives you the chance there to really, for lack of a better word, sell your project as something that they will want to invest in. You have a clear understanding of the need, and you have a clear plan for meeting that need. When the project will happen, timelines are important. And sometimes when we're writing grants, we have a sense of what we want to do, but we haven't necessarily thought through those details. And so I appreciate when funders request a timeline, although sometimes it feels like a real inconvenience in the moment because you haven't had time to think about those details. But this is your chance to do that. It's a check and balance for yourself too. Another reason to start this a little bit early. Have we thought about when this is going to happen? When is planning going to happen? When are we going to engage an artist? Or how are we going to promote? When are we going to promote? All of that leading up to the time that you deliver your project. It's super important because it lets them again know you have a plan, and that there are checkpoints along the way that are going to ensure that you all are actually following that plan. So that timeline can be a really good internal tool as well. And they give you a great example there. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's just clear and concise and as specific as you can make it within the realm of what you know now. Because obviously these projects, none of them even start till after the first of the year. So you may not have deep detail, but whatever sort of framework you've mapped out, that's a great place to share that. Another one that can be tricky is how to estimate people who are going to benefit, particularly if it's a project you've not done before. You just have to give it your best guess. If it's something you have done before, then you're kind of going to work off of history and any data that you may track. If it's something new and you sort of have an understanding of who will be involved, then that's, you give it your best educated guess. I mean, it could be 50 people, it could be 500 people. It's whatever is true to your project. Be realistic about it. And then being able to describe if you're aiming towards this project benefiting a particular population, it's great. They don't give you a ton of room to do that there. So it could be as simple as, this is a project for kids, or it's a project for a particular cultural community, or it's for another sort of sector of our community who is underserved. So think through that and just be clear about it. If it's a general population, it's okay to say that too. The town that you're serving it in, the part of the county that you're serving it, that you expect to draw in. It can be as broad as that, or as specific as this is a project specifically to reach this particular group. Diane pointed this part out to me, and it's really important to emphasize it here. Provide a bulleted list of your partners and describe how each supports your project. I imagine you have many partners, and any partners that you list in this particular section are you're going to be required to obtain a letter of support or endorsement from them. That's the kind of thing you want to start on early. So be sure that you're identifying right out of the gate who are key players in this. Who are you going to be working with that is essential, that you perhaps couldn't do this project without? You could be an organization that's providing volunteers, or it's artists, or it's an organization that's going to host your event. So you want to have that pretty well mapped out right out of the gate so that you can, pardon me, seek out those letters of support, because they are a requirement that you're going to see later in the attachments. How you'll measure success of your project. Again, it's a couple of paragraphs here, so you don't have to get in detail, but I would say this is the area where you want to make sure that you can assure them that you will be able to report back on the success of your project based on, again, those criteria they set up, those impacts and indicators of success. How will you do that? Are you going to do surveys? Are you going to do, you could do in-person surveys, you could do a focus group, you could do exit surveys, you could do an online survey. A lot of it comes down to surveys, or data tracking. We sold this many tickets, and we had this many people attend because we know we had this number of seats. We're taking we're counting heads at the gate as people come into an exhibit or something like that. So how you're going to measure it is very important, because it's one thing to say you will, but it's very much different to say that you are and how you are, because at the end of the day, if you're funded, my guess is there's a report required about this, and this is your ability to articulate those measurements is going to be critical. And so having a good plan in place to measure things is important. You don't have to go overboard. Keep it simple. Do it within the capacity that you have. But again, looking at those indicators of success, what are the things that it would be most important to share back with this funder? If they're looking for certain types of outcomes, how are you going to measure that? I feel like I'm blasting through this, which will leave plenty of time for questions, I hope. I'm going to chat a bit about budgeting, because I think this is an area that can intimidate folks and really get you hung up. Because this is project specific.
Hey, Lisa,
Yeah.
as far as I know, well, it looks like to me you don't have any questions so far, so keep going. I know it looks like one or two people have had to it looks like we might lose two people just because of timing.
Sure.
Just so you know, people are like, I'll just look forward to watching this. If you're thinking about dropping off, this recording, you won't be able to watch before the application time. So if you have questions, I would stay on, because there seems to be a little confusion about that. So, okay, go ahead and talk about the budget.
Important to know. Okay, so this particular application is focused specifically on projects versus general operating support. And I understand that during COVID, there were some concessions made to that, just help keep organizations afloat, and some general operating support was provided. We're moving back to what has been the traditional format, which is for projects. And project budgets are sometimes hard to, you don't quite know what your costs are going to be, or you haven't thought through what that looks like. I'm just going to give you some examples. For building a project budget, you have the bulk of it is going to be things that are direct costs, but I'll talk in a minute about things that are indirect costs. So you want to look at any personnel that is involved, whether that is somebody on your staff and a portion of their time is dedicated to that. You want to figure out what that looks like. If they're going to be dedicating 30 hours of time for the duration of this project at whatever rate they're paid, and their benefits and whatever. I know a lot of folks again are volunteering, but be sure you're calculating that staff time, because that's going to be critical to fulfillment. Stipends for others you're involving, whether it's an artist or a designer or anybody else who might be contributing to your project that you're going to compensate in some way, you want to include that as well. Supplies sort of seem like a no-brainer, but think through all the things you're going to need to deliver on your project, whether it's it can be art supplies, it could be music that you're going to use, or handouts that you're going to provide, anything that you're going to use within the project, both to prepare for it and to deliver it, can fit under supplies. And you could split those out if you want to, but it's a broad category where a lot of things will fit. Think about any costs associated with the use of any venue that you may have. Oftentimes you're getting that space contributed. They don't talk much about in-kind here. And so I think just looking at what are your out-of-pocket costs going to be, but it's helpful to notate on the side if folks are donating goods or services, venue, whatever that may be, keep track of that, because when you think about doing this project in the future, you want to be reminded that that may be a hard cost you have to come up with out of pocket. So venue can be one of those things. Promotion, how are you going to get the word out? Of course, the internet makes it a lot easier to do very much more efficient and cost-effective promotion. But you may have staff time involved in that, or you may want to put out a postcard or a flyer, and there's going to be design, production, delivery, whether it's postage or what have you. So think that through. Travel, are you going to be, moving to different parts of town to engage different people? Any of those costs that are specific to creating this project and delivering this project, and the management of that all around it is part of your project budget. But you can also consider your indirect costs. You do have some overhead anytime you're doing a project. There's just the cost of business that is absorbed by your organization that benefits this project. And in some instances, folks will just include a flat rate of administrative costs that they tack on at the end of, they've created that project budget, they multiply that by 10%, and then so say you have a $5,000 project budget, 10% of that you're going to add as your admin cost. That covers the basics, your phone lines or your office rent, or whatever that may be. It is never a bad thing to include administrative costs. It does remind funders that it takes more than the cost of the project to get a project done. And that's an arena that you may have questions about down the road. And I don't know, Diane, if there's a way that we can be responsive to folks as they're building out their budgets, but definitely consider what your overhead is in the general terms of how this project fits into your organization. Diane, can you think of anything else there that would be helpful to mention?
No, I think you're right, Lisa. I think it's just really, don't think about your bigger organization. Just think specifically about this project and anything that might weave into that. If you're really struggling with this, I know Farah offered to help, and so you might reach out to her. You're more than welcome. I mean, please don't feel like you can't reach out to us at the Arts Alliance. The best person, and who currently is the coordinator, and I'll go ahead and put her contact information in the Q&A for everyone, or the chat, is for Alex. She is the Cultural Coalition coordinator. And so if you're really struggling with having a question, please feel free to reach out to us. Don't feel like you can't do that. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward if you just think about what it is you need to pull off that tiny specific thing, and not your bigger organization, unless that is your whole purpose, is to do that one project. So you're right about that, Lisa.
That's a really good point. Actually, some organizations exist to do one festival or one event. So it might be a bigger budget than that, but really hone in on this expenses related to this project. And that's going to give you your total project budget. You want to give, some line item detail there, because you're going to be required to attach it later. So all of those categories I mentioned, things like that, that's going to be tallied at the bottom, and that's your total. It may well exceed the grant funding limit, and that's not uncommon at all. You may seek other sources of funding. You may have other ways of gathering donations to support to ensure that the project remains whole. Or it may be that you know exactly what the costs are, and you're going to ask for that amount specifically up to that cap of $2,500. Diane shared with me that it is not uncommon for this particular grant pool to, it's not frowned upon to have it cover your total cost if it's within the parameters of the funding range. That isn't always true with all funders. Many funders want to fund a portion, but not all, but that doesn't sound like that's really a limitation here. However, it might be a truth of your project, which is you're going to ask for $2,500, but it's actually going to cost you $3,500. You have a strategy for getting that additional $1,000.
So Lisa, I actually do have a couple of questions right here that might be easy for us to go ahead and answer. Mark wants to know, is the ratio of grant to project budget significant here? Is one more likely to get funded, a grant, if it's $1,000 for a $3,000 project, or $2,500 towards a $4,000 project, or $25,000 for a $12,000 project? Is the ratio significant in this effort?
I don't believe, based on what we talked about, Dan, I don't think that it is. I think what you want to do is ask for what you need, with the understanding that you might not get it all. So you might choose to only ask for 50% because you have another funder who's also going to participate. That's never a bad thing. If you've got somebody else committed to this, to make your project whole financially, that's great. You need the Arts Alliance to close that gap so that your budget can be met. That's great. But I don't think that there's a limitation to that. When I'm putting together budgets for other organizations, they're usually quite a bit larger, but I do look at that ratio. Am I asking for too much? I don't think in this case that's probably going to be a problem for most of you, but you might look at if it were a larger amount and say, well, the total project is this, and I'm asking them to do most of it, and I know that's not what they want to do. But I don't think that's an issue here. But it's a good question. It's always good to test yourself on that too and say, does this sound reasonable? Is it an amount that's going to be meaningful in helping us accomplish this project? And then go for it. They may choose to fund you at a lower level, but it never hurts to ask for what you need.
Right. And I would say in this area, from what I've seen from the grant applications and the coalition members, and this goes for all of you to know, is it depends on the access that your organization has to other funders. So for instance, if you have $1,000 project and you really don't have any other access to funders, I would go ahead and ask for the $1,000. If you have a $2,500 project and you have, maybe it's with the city of Lake Oswego and the city's going to put in $500 towards that, and you have that committed already in your project budget, I would put that and ask for the rest of the money, because for these projects, we're not expecting you to go write a Murdoch grant or something else. But if you have, other city funders, or if you have, individuals that are donating towards the project, or any other kind of funding, go ahead and put that in that budget. And then the rest of it, ask for this. Yeah. Does that make sense, Lisa?
Yeah, and I would say that it's always important to make sure that you have a sense of where your funding is going to come from, equivalent to your expenses. I sometimes see budgets provided that don't really, we're going to raise this much money, but there's a giant gap between what the project actually calls for. So you've got to figure out, where would you get that money if this money didn't come through? You may have one of your partners actually, when in that section we talked about earlier, if you're partnering with somebody, they may be bringing a portion of the funds to the table as part of that partnership. So you want to demonstrate that there are others who have some skin in the game, but at the same time, and not be afraid to ask for the full amount if that's going to get you where you need to go with your project. And then, what specific expenses would a coalition grant award support? You've got 50 words there, so it's going to be limited to its supply, one of those things out of your budget. It's going to pay for stipends for artists. It's going to pay for the promotion to new audiences. It's going to provide the supplies you need for kids to participate. Whatever that is, be specific about it. It doesn't mean that your budget doesn't call for more, but you're going to use their funds very specifically for the project as outlined in your budget, and as much as the maximum amount or whatever amount you ask for correlates to. So, let's say you have a $5,000 project, but you've identified $2,500 worth of expenses that it would be helpful for the coalition to fund. Call that out, and then it'll become clear that there are other ways you're going to fund other things. And I don't know that there's any other greater limitation on that. I didn't see anything. And then, how will you be able to accomplish your project if you're not fully funded? And it does happen. And I don't have a track record with this funder, but if you ask for $2,500 and you get $1,000, are you going to raise that money elsewhere? And if so, do you have anything specific you can share? Are you going to scale the project back? Or if you don't get the full funding, will you delay the project for another time until you can get it funded? Those are all legitimate responses, and none of them are wrong. And it should not hurt you in pursuing funding. It does help the funder know that you've thought this through, and that if it isn't funded at a certain level, you have a plan, even if it means delaying the project. So most often that plan is you're going to find the money somewhere else. And that's a good general statement, but if you don't feel like you can do that, then I wouldn't use that, and you might scale it back. We thought we could serve 100 people, but depending on levels of funding, we'll scale it back accordingly. It's a decent answer. And then all the good financial stuff. These are all attachments that you'll want to make sure you have on hand. I check these early too, because sometimes you're getting this from somebody else who manages this aspect of your work. Financial pieces are usually handled by people who understand financial stuff. But there are some common documentation that should be coming through if you're, an organization, a viable organization. Your 2021 profit and loss statement or budget is, how did you end your last fiscal year? Was it whether it was December 31st or wherever that may be? So they want to see what your profit and loss statement or your budget, how it ended up last year. That is different from what they're asking the second question, which is a year-to-date profit and loss statement. That's up to be pulled from where you are at your current budget. If you, for example, if your fiscal year did start July 1, you're going to, it's nearing this will be October by the time you submit this. So you might be able to provide them with August or September P&L, other financial statements. If your fiscal year began in January, similarly, you're going to have more time has elapsed, but it's going to be the closest you can come to providing those statements to the time that you apply. But there's an understanding among funders that there's a gap in timing because it takes time to reconcile your books, have those profit and loss statements approved or budgets approved, but just try to seek out the most current ones that you have. So what you've got is the statements for your last fiscal year and where you are in this fiscal year. That can sometimes be confusing. There are supplemental materials here that you can offer, which I think is great, but don't feel like you have to. If you have to go out of your way to make them just because you feel like you should, don't worry about it. I think that's not necessary. The letters of support are probably one of the most important things. It's certainly required if you have noted partnerships in your grant application, but it's also another way of just demonstrating the community's interest or desire for this project to happen. So if you can get an endorsement letter or endorsement statements that you can compile into a document, anytime you can show that the community is relying on you to help make something happen and that you happen to be the best organization to do that on behalf of the community, that's helpful. Partnership agreements, particularly if there's rental costs involved or anything else like that, quotes for services, you have to pay for venue, all of those things are important to have. Bios and resumes never hurt for artists either, just helps them know that you are working with folks who are experts in what they do or they're appropriate to this project. So I would say do whatever makes sense, do the things that are not difficult for you to pull together, or step back enough to say, you know what, we feel like this is important for us to think through too. So we're gonna go through the process of developing this and then we can share it, which is not a bad thing. And if you have any other materials, if you've already created a promotional piece around this, that's where your chance to provide that in this other materials section. If you've got a great promotional piece already put together, show it to them. It will let them know. It gives a nice flavor to your project, lets them know where you are in your process, and or if you've done this project before and you have an example to share from last year or a final report from last year, whatever that might be, just again gives them more a sense of what your project is about and how you're qualified to do it. If you have video from a past event in particular, I think that's always fun to share. As you mentioned, the letters of support, and then just acknowledging that to the best of your knowledge, the information you're providing is accurate. I don't doubt that it is, but it's always good to check yourself and say, is that a number I wish we could achieve, or is that something we feel we can achieve? And then luckily it does allow you to save your draft, which is nice, just in case you want to go back and change something. You've got that organization president or ED or whomever your leader is, their name, by placing their name there, that says you have their approval to submit this, whomever might be doing that on behalf of your organization. And then don't forget to click submit before the deadline, which I believe when I looked at the details was 5 p.m. On the 21st. So don't take it down to the wire like that. It's never worth it for the lack of sleep that you'll have the night before. Anyway, that's what I know. I think it's a pretty straightforward application, which is nice. There's no, some funders kind of look at how to get information out of you that is not necessarily necessary to the project or easy for you to pull together, but this is very doable. The word limits really force you to be concise. So look for that in the language that's concise, compelling, and that would set you above apart because this is a competitive grant process. And good luck.
Hey, that's awesome. I think we've answered most everybody's question. I've either typed an answer back to your question, or I think the one thing I kind of combined a couple of questions together. If you have specific questions, if you have more questions about this, please ask. If you have specific questions about your application, please stay on and we'll go ahead and cover that. I'm going to stop recording. First of all, I want to thank everybody on behalf of the Cultural Coalition and the Arts Alliance. Thank you for coming tonight. Don't go anywhere. I'm just going to stop recording. Thank you.